The formats. One of the major differences between these games is the formats. Magic has a total of three main formats. Well, I guess five if you count Vintage and Legacy, but those Vintage isn't played nearly enough to really be considered a main format, and Commander is so different from your normal Magic, from your normal game of Magic that it doesn't apply to anything. Yu-Gi-Oh, on the other hand, only has two. Really one, depending on where you live and how your group likes to play. Magic has Standard, Modern, and Legacy, and the Yu-Gi-Oh formats are known as TCG and OCG. In Yu-Gi-Oh with both formats, every card ever printed within the game's lifespan is legal for tournament use, aside from cards listed on a specific ban list, which is a list of cards that are banned from tournament use. The Legacy format in Magic also functions this way and is probably, in terms of on paper, how the formats function, Legacy is probably the most comparable thing to Yu-Gi-Oh! In terms of how the format kind of functions. Now, the main difference between the TCG and the OCG is the TCG format is played in America and Europe, while OCG format is played in Japan as well as the rest of Asia. Up until very recently, within the last 1-2 years or so, the ban list for these formats is pretty much the same, aside from your occasional card, the occasional card that was only printed in Japan, or a minor card limitation or restriction. It was really rare to see a card banned on the TCG and not on the OCG, or vice versa. Um, but that's kind of commonplace now. Um, I've never played OCG that much, but its list of bleh, but its list of banned and limited cards is much smaller than the TCG. The ban list is much smaller. Viewing the OCG ban list and comparing it to the TCG list really makes me think that the OCG would technically be considered a quote-unquote better format, just because of the larger card pool as well as the card options you have, the wider variety of cards that you can use, and which means more options for deck building. Now, as I said before, I've never played OCG, but I feel it's really important to mention because as of right at the time of the making of this video, um, they're pretty much entirely different games, um, especially in terms of meta. Um, like I said, I've never really played OCG, but I kind of wanted to talk about it at least a little bit before I really get into the meat of the video. In Magic, Standard and Modern are what most people consider the popular formats. In Standard, only cards from the two most recent blocks and the most recent core set are legal. A block consists of 2 to 3 different sets. For example, the Innistrad block consists of 3 sets: Innistrad, Dark Ascension, and Avacyn Restored. Blocks usually have some sort of theme, whether it be a gimmick like Gothic horror or something more related to Magic the Gathering lore, because MTG does have kind of like a general blue storyline. Yu-Gi-Oh does too, with all its different archetypes. But the core sets are a little bit more basic. The cards you find in a core set are a little bit more generic than those found in any given block. Standard has a really, really small card pool when compared to the other formats. Because of this, Standard almost never has a banned list, and every card in its card pool is legal. Every once in a great while, you might see what's called an emergency ban, which happens when a card is deemed too powerful for the format, so they ban it for Standard. These bans keep the format open and maintain a lot of deck variety, because, I mean, you don't really want people playing this. You don't want everybody playing the exact same deck. That'd just be boring. Um, the most recent emergency bans that I can think of happened a few years back when Zendikar was the newest block. For whatever reason, I can't really think of what year that was. I want to say 2005, 2008, somewhere in there. But the most recent cards that come to mind that got an emergency ban were Jace the Mind Sculptor and Stoneforge Mystic. Both of those cards are considered to be some of the best cards within their respective colors. It's interesting because in terms of the actual meta, This format is closest to Yu-Gi-Oh because um, there are generally only 3 to 4 competitive decks, but it kind of makes more sense in terms of standard, just because the amount of cards just in the format is so much smaller when compared to the rest of the formats in Magic. Um, Now, Modern is the second most played Magic format. It has quite a larger card pool when compared to Standard. Every card, starting with the core 8th edition set, and everything after that is illegal. And 8th edition was printed in 2003, and at the time of this video, that's about 12 years worth of cards. This format, unlike Standard, actually has a very solid ban list. Um, it's This is understandable due to its larger card pool. I personally don't agree with most of the cards on said list, but I can see why some people do. A lot of the cards on the ban list for Modern are cards that mana acceleration is a big one, um, massive draw power, and cards like Green Sun Zenith or Birthing Pod that just straight up put things into play without really doing anything else. Um, but I can see why some people like the format because of that. Some people just want an overall slower game, and there's nothing wrong with that. I've actually just started playing Modern a little bit, and I gotta say, it's kind of nice just to be able to play a game and not have to worry about Force of Will. But speaking of Force of Will, let's talk about Legacy. It's one of the eternal formats, quote unquote eternal formats. In Legacy, every card ever printed in the history of Magic is legal, aside from those on a specific ban list. This format specifically, I use this format specifically in comparison to Yu-Gi-Oh because I feel it's the most similar format. Legacy isn't played as much as Modern or Standard, largely due to the cost of making a good Legacy deck. For example, a decent competitive Standard deck will run you anywhere between $250 to $500, just depending on the set and what cards are in the set. A good competitive Legacy deck can easily cost you upwards of $1,000. Just kind of depending on the deck and the cards and everything. But $1,000 is very commonplace in terms of Legacy decks. That being said, there's still pretty cheap decks that can do very well in Legacy. The decks that instantly come to mind are Infect or Poison and Burn. You have Burn, which is what I play in Legacy. It costs about as much as a good standard deck, between 250 500. And Poison or Infect, whichever you want to call it, usually cost under $100. I mean, there are certain cards that you can use to make the deck better that can put it just over $100. But most builds I see that actually get used are well under $100. There's a deck for pretty much everyone in Legacy in terms of both money and playstyle, which is part of the reason why I like it so much. Now, if you take all these formats and compare them all with each other, the two Magic formats that can be easily compared to Yu-Gi-Oh! Are Standard and Legacy. Standard is more in line with the meta of Yu-Gi-Oh! Because it generally only has 3 to 4 competitive decks. But any given Standard format also has a much smaller card pool than what's currently in Yu-Gi-Oh! Legacy matches up with Yu-Gi-Oh! In terms of how the format is made, in terms of how the format actually works, with every card being legal except for those on a list. It's interesting because Yu-Gi-Oh, in my mind, seems to take the worst parts of all the Magic formats and bases its entire game around it. Um, it just takes I would say in terms of card pool, Yu-Gi-Oh and Modern are about the same size, with Yu-Gi-Oh having a slightly larger card pool, with it functioning like Legacy at the same time, on top of having a very large ban list when compared to pretty much anything else. You're taking a small card pool and making it even smaller for seemingly no reason. Now, this is a little understandable due to how Yu-Gi-Oh works as a game. You're a little bit more open in terms of what cards you can run on what deck when compared to Magic. You can in theory run pretty much any card in any deck in Yu-Gi-Oh. But because of this, Konami has really backed themselves into a corner as to what they can print or what they can't print or what they can or can't take off the ban list. The different formats lets Wizards of the Coast be very open and creative when making new cards, as different cards will do better in different formats. And I feel this is what has kept the game alive and thriving for so many years. Now, that being said, Wizards of the Coast, up until recently, the last couple of standard sets have been lackluster in terms of cards for the different formats. But that also being said, Modern is still a relatively young format when compared to the other two. So for a while they kind of had a focus on making cards that would be good specifically in Modern. I feel that over the last couple of ban lists, and how the game has progressed over the last couple of years, Konami has really shot themselves in the foot in terms of how their game just functions. And the ban list and just how they've arranged everything, it's controlling how they print and how they alter the rest of the game. Um, but yeah, I think the formats really is what kind of separates the games, because Konami is basically printing cards to one format. Are they going to be good in this format? Can we make the ban lists more susceptible to making these cards be good? Basically, it's really controlling how they print their cards. Whereas Magic, with its many different formats, I think really lets them be a little bit more creative and open, because different cards are going to do well in different formats. But anyway, thanks for watching. Tune in next time where we're going to talk about deck variety and compare some tournament listings. As always, thanks for watching. Will out.